Hello and welcome to part 2 of Confident Contractor. How you doing? So today we're going to be talking about mostly compliance and cash flow. This is the second section of the book. The part 1 was last week's. You can probably find the upload, and we'll get into this. So compliance and cash flows are two major parts following the contract, and one of those things that we have to look at is data protection. So I will normally talk about keeping the data safe, and this is even more so when you've got regulations like GDPR kicking about. Absolutely no one should have access to data if they don't need access, and the data should be securely stored so that only authorized people can get access to it. And sometimes, if you're handling certain types of data, you need to have procedures and handling rules around that. Another type of data, intellectual property rights. The importance of IP in contracting is usually who owns it and who has the right to use it. Now in my work, I work with a lot of open source software, so we have licenses that are specified about whether somebody needs to pay to use the software or whether it's just an attribution or something else. But intellectual property is anything that you can create. And if you're an artist, it tends to be the graphics. If you're a programmer like me, then it can be the code itself. Creating a website is also IP, and it's important enough to be mentioned within the contract that the contract will state who owns IP, who gets IP from where, and so anything like that needs to be recorded so that we know where it is. Companies House. Companies House is an organisation in the UK that's responsible for reporting on and holding data about UK companies. As a IT contractor, chances are a limited company is the right vehicle for you to use, so you will need to comply with the rules and regulations about reporting to Companies House. Most of it's annually, but we'll get onto that shortly. Liability insurance. Insurance is another thing where you have to be compliant. You want yourself to have the right level of insurance, whether it's public insurance if you're dealing with members of the public, or staff insurance, or more likely professional indemnity insurance. Making sure you've got the correct level of cover. It will probably be mentioned in the contract as well, and making sure that it's in place and that you're reporting on it. And so here's the annual checklist that I was referring to. The most compliance things require you to have a report probably once a year. There's a couple of others that need it a little bit more regularly than that, but the majority is once a year. And in the book there's a checklist to make sure that you've got everything covered. The easiest way to keep everything covered is by keeping accurate and timely records, especially around the accounts. If you've got those records of when did the contract start, when did the contract end, when did you do this, when did you do that, then it makes everything else after the fact easier to report on. You can't fill in those gaps if you don't have the data recorded in the first place, which somewhat comes onto risks and challenges. If you're missing some data, then that might be a risk. If your customer is expecting a certain report, then it's going to be difficult for you to fulfill that request unless you know about it beforehand and gather the correct information first. But what about expenses? Well, expenses can fall into two categories. You've got category 1, which is if the customer will pay for that expense or not, and category 2, where you have to pay for it, or rather your limited company has to pay for it. Further breaking those down is the limited company has then got allowable expenses against tax, and those expenses that aren't allowable against tax. And who can forget paying yourself? After all, that's the whole point of having a business, right? We work to earn money at this time. But depends on how you pay yourself can have a big impact. If it's salary versus dividends, or a mixture of the two, can have an impact on the tax. And the tax in this case is making sure you've got enough money in your bank account so that when the tax bill is due, you can pay it with no issues. So one of those reporting that's not annually is usually quarterly as VAT. And now as far as your business is concerned, VAT comes in, VAT goes out, and as long as you don't spend the money, you shouldn't have any issues. PAYE is how you pay yourself if you're paying a salary. Corporation tax, on the other hand, is where any profits that you create from your company are taxed, and you need to understand how expenses and how you pay yourself can also have an impact on what that corporation tax figure is. Self-assessment is the UK's tax way of you declaring how much income you've received, and not all income is treated equally. Again, depends on how you receive or where you receive the income from, depends on how much tax is attached to it. So if you want to pay the correct amount of tax, it's a good idea to have a chat, work out what the numbers are, and so that you're prepared for that. Of course, none of this can happen until the invoice goes off to the customer. If you don't invoice the customer isn't going to pay you. Once the customer does receive the invoice, then they will pay the invoice, hopefully, on time, hopefully, and then it flows into your business. At that point, your business can then decide what it wants to do with those funds, be it paying expenses, or paying you, or investing in something else. So taking money out of the business can take many forms. The expenses, the PAYE, the tax, and all of this stuff needs to be thought about before you do it, because deciding on one way or another can have implications on the other ones. So if you're taking out more PAYE, then the corporation tax would go down, just as one example. And so in order to help bring all this together, there's a cash flow timetable. What is due when? What's due to come in and what's due to come out? And we summarize that in the book so that you know where you stand. Talking of the book, there it is, Confident Contractor. It's out on the 24th of July. And if you're ready to become a contractor, or maybe you're not sure, then we've got a handy quiz that you can take. It'll take 2 minutes or so, go through some questions, identify those gaps. And if you've got some gaps that I can help you with, then get on a call and we can discuss those. Thanks very much, and I'll see you next time.